came on Daystar and you publicly affirmed their relationship as being of the Lord. Can you do that in good conscience without having talking to Lisa to get her side of the story?
I don't care. The great thing about being my age is I just don't care. I've got a good quality of life.
Nobody saw this coming. Just moments ago, Jimmy Evans said something that left the entire Daystar community speechless. It wasn't just a passing comment. It was a bombshell that shook the foundation of everything we thought we knew about Johnny Lamb. Fans are scrambling for answers. Social media is in meltdown, and the ripple effect is just beginning. What did Jimmy reveal? And why now? The truth behind his words might change everything you believe about this story. For years, Jimmy Evans kept quiet. People saw him as a trusted voice, a calming presence, someone who stood beside the Lamb family no matter what. He was the guest preacher, the marriage counselor, the man who showed up when things got hard. But behind that calm image was a man holding on to a secret, a moment he couldn't forget, no matter how hard he tried. Then, out of nowhere, everything changed. A leaked conversation surfaced online, and suddenly, Jimmy's silence was broken. What he said wasn't loud or angry, but it was enough to shake the entire Daystar world to its core. In that private conversation, Jimmy talked about a meeting that had stayed with him for years. It wasn't just a casual get-together. It was a moment that, according to him, felt heavy, wrong, and completely out of place. He sat across from Jonathan Lamb and Susie, and the energy in the room, he said, was tense and controlled. Then someone asked him to do something he never expected. They wanted him to convince Jonathan to submit to his mother, Joni, not just respect her, but obey her fully, as if she were the voice of God in his life. Jimmy hesitated. It didn't feel right, but in the moment, he went along with it. He repeated the idea that Johnny was speaking for God, hoping to keep peace, to avoid more division. But the words hit him like a weight. As he said them, he realized how wrong they felt. That moment never left him. And now, years later, he admitted he regretted it. That single sentence, "Johnny is the voice of God," wasn't just about family dynamics. It was about control, about spiritual pressure, about keeping a system in place that hurt more people than it helped. When the clip leaked, it opened the floodgates. People who had trusted Jimmy didn't know what to think. Fans of Daystar, longtime viewers, even some within the ministry, started to question everything. Was this the kind of leadership happening behind the scenes? Was this what Marcus Lamb would have wanted? And most importantly, how long had everyone been pretending everything was okay? Jimmy's moment of honesty hit hard. He said he thought he was protecting the ministry, doing the right thing, being loyal. But now he realized that silence wasn't loyalty. It was complicity. And the truth, no matter how painful, needed to come out.
Being bold to speak the truth and to not be a part of a cover-up. And that's led us to where we are now completely free, not attached to any sort of major institution or any type of control, to where we're able to be a voice for truth and to be able to stand up against injustice and be a voice for others out there who are have been through abuse or been through a difficulty or been part of a culture that encourages people to cover things up. We're so excited that we can help be a force that can shine the light on the darkness and allow the Lord to do a cleansing work in the body of Christ. So thank you all for all the people that have written to us and supported us and loved on us. It's really just been so overwhelming.
The family meeting was supposed to fix things. That's how it started. Jonathan Lamb had been holding things in for years, watching everything around him fall apart. His family, his faith in how Daystar was being run, and the picture-perfect image the world still believed in. Behind the cameras and lights, there was tension, silence, wounds that never healed. So when he called for a private family meeting, it wasn't about revenge or drama. It was about finally getting some truth in the room. He didn't book a boardroom or make it formal. This wasn't about ministry business. This was personal. Everyone was invited. Siblings, spouses, people who had been close to Marcus and Joni, even Jimmy Evans. And to his surprise, Joni showed up. For a moment there was real hope. Maybe she was finally ready to listen. Maybe the walls would come down. But that hope didn't last long. As the meeting began, Jonathan tried to be respectful. He talked about the pain that had built up since Marcus died, about how quickly Joni moved on, about how things felt off inside the ministry. He asked everyone to speak honestly, to lay everything out, not to attack, but to understand each other. People began sharing, some calm, others emotional. It was raw. It was real. They talked about feeling pushed out, ignored, confused by the changes, hurt by the silence. Then came Joni's turn, but instead of listening or opening up, she pulled out her phone and set a timer. "You each have 60 seconds, she said flatly. At first, they thought she was joking. She wasn't. 1 minute per person, to explain years of pain, confusion, and betrayal. People looked at each other, stunned. That's all they got. 60 seconds. When the last person finished, Joni stood up, looked around the room, and said everyone there was operating in fear. Then she walked out. No hugs, no prayers, no follow-up. She had a flight to New York to see Doug Weiss. And just like that, she was gone. The people left in the room sat in stunned silence. Jonathan realized in that moment that the mother he had hoped to reach wasn't there anymore. She wasn't trying to fix anything. She had made up her mind, and anyone who didn't agree with her was simply dismissed.
Your concern is to do what she says, and if you can't be here.
No, it is my concern.
No, Jonathan, you keep arguing with everything. You got to stop.
I'm not arguing.
You're arguing with everything. You've got to stop. And it has to end with both of you acknowledging her authority. She is God's voice to you here on this property and related to Daystar Network. She is God's voice. You submit or you leave. That's really the truth.
I mean, there will be a viewer comment the next time you are on about Doug. So you either submit and read it or you leave. And there's not going to be any in between.
Jimmy Evans, who had come thinking this might be a time for healing, sat frozen. He later admitted that he felt the meeting wasn't spiritual at all. The energy was wrong. The atmosphere felt controlled, tense, and even manipulative. When someone in the room asked him to tell Jonathan to submit to his mother, Jimmy went along with it in the moment. He told Jonathan that Joni was the voice of God in his life and over the ministry. He said it and he regretted it, because deep down he knew it wasn't right. That sentence haunted him. For Jonathan and Susie, that moment was a line in the sand. They left the meeting, not just upset, but changed. Something broke. They knew things wouldn't go back to how they were. They couldn't pretend anymore. They couldn't stay quiet to protect an image. It wasn't about rebellion. It was about survival, about protecting their daughter, their faith, and their own integrity. In the days that followed, everything got colder. Joni didn't reach out. People who once stood beside them were silent. Friends from within the ministry began quietly pulling away. Some checked in with Jonathan and Susie behind the scenes, saying they saw what happened, but didn't know how to help. Others, like Denise Boggs, who had been a trusted friend and counselor, wrote heartfelt letters, pleading with Joni to slow down, to listen, to seek God before going further with Doug Weiss. But Johnny Lamb didn't respond. Instead, she tightened her circle. She doubled down on the decisions she was making, including her fast-track relationship with Doug, and anyone who questioned it, even her own son, was viewed as disloyal. That mindset, submit or leave, was now defining how things worked in the family and the ministry. The family meeting, meant to heal old wounds, only ripped them open wider. Jonathan and Susie stopped appearing on Daystar, not because they were bitter, but because they couldn't take part in something that felt so far from what it once stood for. The silence that followed wasn't out of respect anymore. It was self-protection. Behind the scenes, Daystar was beginning to change too. People noticed. Viewers sent messages. Longtime supporters asked where Jonathan was. Why wasn't Susie hosting anymore? Why did everything feel different? But no one got answers. Just smiles on air, polished segments, carefully curated broadcasts. But the truth? It was buried. That meeting exposed something deeper than family drama. It showed how power had shifted, how the ministry, once built on unity and faith, now felt like it was built on image and control. It wasn't about walking through grief together. It was about moving forward without looking back, no matter who got hurt. Even Jimmy Evans began to see it. He started speaking differently, more humbly, more honestly. He admitted that silence, even with good intentions, had helped cover things up. That moment where he told Jonathan to submit haunted him. He thought he was helping, But now he realized he was just keeping the mask on a little longer. People like Denise tried again to reach out. She warned that Daystar was being used, not by God, but by pride. That if things didn't change, the fallout would be bigger than anyone expected. But by then, it was already happening. Staff began to leave. Pastors declined invites. Donors pulled back. And viewers started to see through the cracks. The family meeting could have been the turning point. It could have been the beginning of healing. But instead, it became the final blow. A moment so full of tension and pride that it broke something that couldn't be put back together. Joni walked out, and with her, the chance for true restoration. For Jonathan and Susie, it was heartbreaking, but it was also clarifying. They now understood what they were dealing with. This wasn't just about grief. This was about control, silence, and a refusal to face hard truths. And they weren't going to play along anymore. That one meeting, behind closed doors, without cameras or stage lights, shattered the illusion. The perfect Christian family, the united front, the ministry built on trust, it all cracked in that room. And from that point on, nothing was the same. There are moments in a family's life that feel like they tear everything apart. Moments that change the way you look at the people you've loved your whole life. For Jonathan Lamb, that moment came quietly, behind closed doors, with no audience and no cameras. It started with a gut feeling. Something wasn't right. His daughter, still young, still innocent, began acting differently. At first he thought maybe it was stress or fear, but the more he paid attention, the more he realized this wasn't something small. She didn't say much, just little things that sent shivers down his spine. Jonathan didn't want to believe it. No parent ever does. But soon, the puzzle pieces started to fit together, and what they pointed to was horrifying. Someone in the family, someone trusted, had hurt her. Not emotionally, not with words, but physically, in the worst way possible. A violation that no child should ever have to live through and no parent should ever have to discover. He didn't wait. He didn't brush it off. He didn't tell himself it would go away. Jonathan confronted it head on. He did what any father would do. He asked questions. He demanded answers. And he expected his parents, Joni and Marcus, to protect their granddaughter and support him in finding the truth. But that's not what happened. Instead of rallying around him, they pulled away. Marcus, the leader of Daystar, said they had already looked into it, that an internal investigation had cleared the family member. No police, no professionals, just a few conversations behind the scenes. It was over, Marcus told him. Case closed. But for Jonathan, it was just beginning. He didn't feel peace. He felt sick. And when he turned to Joni, hoping that maybe she'd see what was really happening, she disappointed him even more. She didn't believe him. She didn't want to hear it. She stood by Marcus and defended the accused. She didn't even ask for details. She shut it down. That hurt more than anything. Jonathan wasn't just a son anymore. He was a father trying to protect his own child. And the woman who had raised him, who had preached love and protection on national television, had turned her back. She didn't listen. She didn't comfort. She dismissed him. And that was the moment something inside Jonathan broke. He stopped trying to explain. He stopped asking for help. He pulled back, emotionally and spiritually. From that moment on, he knew he couldn't trust the people who had built their lives around trust. The betrayal wasn't just about ignoring the abuse. It was about choosing silence over protection, image over truth. Years passed. They never talked about it again. Not in public, not at home. The secret stayed buried. Like so many others in the ministry, Jonathan and Susie tried to carry on, to stay close to the family, to keep their heads down. But nothing ever healed. Every family dinner, every broadcast, every sermon about faith and healing just made the silence louder. Because no one ever acknowledged what happened. Then Marcus died, and instead of things slowing down, they sped up. Joni didn't grieve with the family. She didn't stop to reflect. Within weeks, she was planning a new wedding. To Doug Weiss, a man barely anyone knew. A man who showed up out of nowhere and became a fixture in Joni's life, faster than anyone could process. For Jonathan and Susie, that was the final sign. The past was truly being erased. The pain wasn't going to be faced. Joni wasn't just walking away from them. She was rewriting the story in real time, pretending the wound never existed, but it did. and it was deep. When the family meeting was called, Jonathan hoped, just barely, that maybe there was still a chance to talk about everything. Maybe Joni would listen this time. Maybe, just maybe, the truth could come out and healing could begin. But it didn't go that way. Instead, he was told once again to submit, not just to respect Joni, but to obey her, to see her as the voice of God, even when that voice had failed him and his daughter. And that's when Jonathan truly knew they weren't going to fix this. They weren't even trying. The truth about what happened to his daughter was never acknowledged. There was no apology, no second investigation, no justice, just silence. And for Susie, watching it all happen as both a wife and a mother, it was unbearable. That's when she began speaking up, quietly at first, and then more publicly. Not to stir up drama, but because she couldn't carry the weight alone anymore. Others in the ministry started to find out. People like Denise Boggs, who had been with the family for years, heard the details and were devastated. Denise had prayed with Joni, preached alongside Marcus, and believed in the ministry, but this was something she couldn't ignore. She wrote Joni a personal letter. She begged her to stop, to slow down, to seek God's voice and not just her own pride. She warned her that Doug Weiss was dangerous, that he wasn't who he seemed. She called him a wolf in sheep's clothing. She said that Daystar was no longer a ministry. It was being used as a tool for control and image. But Joni didn't answer. Just like before. She didn't call. She didn't explain. She didn't even try. Once again, she walked away. From her children, from her granddaughter, from the truth. And the damage left behind was more than just emotional. It was spiritual. Because when a ministry that preaches truth won't face the truth in its own home, everything begins to feel hollow. The viewers didn't know the whole story, but they started to sense it. The smiles on camera felt forced. The sermons felt thin. The warmth was gone. And slowly, the legacy started to collapse, all because of a secret too painful to speak aloud, and a betrayal that still hasn't been made right. There was a time when Daystar felt unshakable. It wasn't just a Christian TV network. It was a household name, a spiritual home for millions. People tuned in for prayer, worship, and teaching. They believed in what they saw. The Lamb family stood on stage, smiling, holding hands, speaking about faith, family, and the power of God. To the outside world, it looked perfect. Almost too perfect. But behind the lights, something else was happening, and no one wanted to talk about it, not at first. After Marcus Lamb passed away, everything began to unravel faster than anyone expected. At first, people thought it was just grief, that Joni was pushing forward out of strength. But it didn't feel like strength to those who were closest to her. It felt like denial. Within weeks, she was back on camera. Within months, she was announcing her new relationship. And, before anyone could catch their breath, she was remarried to a man almost no one in the ministry had even heard of, Doug Weiss. That's when the questions started, not just from viewers, but from the people inside the ministry, the ones who knew how decisions were being made. People who had walked alongside Joni and Marcus for decades were suddenly left out of meetings, ignored, or even pushed away. And when they asked for clarity, they were met with a wall. Trust the process, they were told. It's all in God's hands. But behind the scenes, it wasn't God making the decision. It was Joni. Everything shifted, and fast. Jonathan and Susie Lamb stepped back from the public eye. They stopped appearing on broadcasts, stopped giving updates, stopped pretending everything was fine. It wasn't fine. The truth is, they had been struggling long before Marcus died. They had stayed silent, hoping things would heal naturally. But the more they waited, the worse it got. And when Joni married Doug, something snapped. It was no longer about grief, it was about control. Then came the breaking point, the family meeting that was supposed to bring healing. Instead, it brought the truth out into the open. What happened in that room changed everything. Joni didn't come to listen, she came to set rules. She gave each person 60 seconds to speak, 1 minute to unpack years of heartbreak, betrayal, confusion, and spiritual pain. And when the last voice finished, she stood up, dismissed their words, and walked out. There were no tears, no prayers, no reconciliation, just a cold reminder of how far things had drifted. From there, the ministry started to bleed. Quietly, internally, people didn't make public announcements, they just left. Staff members who had been there for years handed in resignations. Pastors who had once praised Daystar declined invitations. Ministry partners slowly pulled their support. The emails stopped. The donations started to dip. And still, Joni smiled on camera, acting like nothing was wrong. But something was deeply wrong. And people felt it. The spirit of Daystar, the unity, the honesty, the vulnerability, was gone. It had been replaced with image management. Everything was about control, about keeping up the appearance that everything was blessed, anointed, and favored. But off camera, there were tears. There were confrontations. There were private conversations between longtime friends wondering what had happened to the ministry they once believed in. And then came the leaked audio, the moment that shattered the illusion. Jimmy Evans, a trusted friend and pastor, had been caught in a private conversation. In that moment, he confirmed what many feared. He admitted that he had been asked to tell Jonathan Lamb to submit to Joni as the voice of God inside the ministry. Not respect, not honor, submit. That conversation wasn't just a leadership disagreement. It was spiritual manipulation. It showed the level of control Joni was trying to maintain, not just as a grieving widow, but as a leader who couldn't be questioned. People were stunned. The ministry that had once stood for truth and healing had turned into something else, something darker. Something that punished dissent and praised obedience to a person, not to God. And that's when it all began to crumble. Viewers stopped watching. Donors quietly backed out. Social media comments, once filled with praise and support, were now filled with questions, concerns, and heartbreak. Where's Jonathan? Why is Susie gone? Why won't Joni talk about what's really going on? The silence from Daystar only made it worse. Because silence, in the face of truth, always feels like guilt. And behind the scenes, it was even more painful. Friends became strangers, the studio became a battleground, and the people who had once shared everything, meals, prayers, sermons, were now divided by a wall of secrets. Joni continued to preach. She smiled, she hosted, she traveled. But her inner circle had changed. The people who once told her the truth were gone, replaced by yes men. And Doug Weiss, the man she married in the wake of Marcus's death, was now by her side. But he wasn't there to heal. He was there to protect the narrative, the new image. And that's what this was always about, image. Daystar had built its legacy on the appearance of faith, family, and unity. But now that image was falling apart. Because you can't hide pain forever. You can't bury truth and expect it not to rise. And once it did, nothing looked the same. People who had once been the face of Christian media were now the center of controversy. The people who had inspired millions were now a cautionary tale. Not because they weren't good people, but because they let power matter more than people. They chose silence over honesty, and they confused spiritual leadership with personal authority. Now the collapse isn't loud. It's quiet. It's slow, but it's real. Because the real damage wasn't to the brand. It was to the hearts of the people who trusted them, the viewers who prayed with them, the families who looked up to them, the believers who thought Daystar was different. And in many ways it was. It was built on love and vision, but it lost its way. It didn't fall because the world attacked it. It fell because the truth came out. And when that happens, no amount of stage lights, worship music, or broadcast production can hide the cracks. Because when a ministry starts caring more about how it looks than what it stands for, collapse isn't a question, it's a matter of time.